Hey everyone, Dr. T here, and you're listening to Concentrates, a podcast discussing cannabis science, news, and hot topics. Today, I'm going to be going through this article published on Lifehacker by Danielle Garcia. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Called Why Effects Based Cannabis Marketing is Mostly Bullshit, which the sentiment is absolutely 100% correct. Most effects based marketing is based on almost nothing, although sometimes it can be based on some legitimate science, but still, how that's going to play out is is going to depend on the individual and some other things that we'll be talking about as we go through this. So just because the packaging promises a couch locked high doesn't mean the weed will deliver it. So true. So unpredictability is one of the core challenges of shopping for cannabis. It's incredibly rare to have a completely custom, controlled experience with weed, and even tougher to duplicate it. Yes, that's a 100% true sentiment. Um, Almost in no case will somebody tell you, oh, this will make you feel in this way and it'll make you feel exactly in that way. Part of it is that maybe your expectations for how that will feel, the description of how that will feel, and how it actually feels are two different things. Um, so to people who don't already enjoy the herb, these variables can seem too great to navigate, which is why marketing has tried to turn a bunch of cannabis plants into unique and innovative products promising to cut through the literal haze. So, yeah, I mean, I think for people who are new to cannabis or are curious about cannabis, the number of products and the descriptions of effects and what to even expect can be overwhelming. And so, a lot of people that maybe are interested or maybe tried it once and didn't have the experience that they thought they would or thought they wanted to have, and then they haven't really approached it again. This is very common. And unfortunately, there's absolutely no way right now for anybody to absolutely promise that if you take this, you will feel this effect. But there can be guidance given, and I'll get to some guidance that I have later in this podcast. Many of the newer products are positioned as problem solvers for life's typical woes, Danielle writes, solving for lack of sleep, stimulating your appetite, or solving for general aches and pains. Since cannabis isn't FDA regulated, manufacturers can't promise any direct health benefits, but boy, do some brands love to infer them. And this is a whole game, inferring effects without making any sort of health promises, because ultimately, no cannabis product can say this will cure your insomnia, because insomnia is a disease condition, and you can't make a claim that you will cure or treat a disease condition without the appropriate level of clinical trials. So they get around this. Many cannabis manufacturers get around this by trying to figure out ways of describing feelings that aren't necessarily addressing disease states. So instead of saying cures insomnia, you might say relaxes you before bed. And or some other kind of way to get around it, stimulating your appetite. Because a lack of appetite can be a medical condition. So you need to be careful about that. Maybe it's munchies. It's is written on the packaging, which is not addressing a medical condition. So calming and soothing are also used because a lack of calm is not necessarily a medical condition, but it couldn't say cures anxiety or eases anxiety would be probably um, crossing the line or touching that line. So moving on, Danielle continues to write, overly simplified marketing creates confusion for the consumer, driving myths of CBD can cure all and THC is your key to a vault of creativity. Which I'd like to also add in here that, a lot of people kind of see CBD as simply THC without the psychoactivity, without getting you high. And it's really not that at all. It's true that it doesn't have the same kind of psychoactive effects as THC, but it does have its own psychoactive effects. It's often said to calm and reduce anxiety, things like that. But and that's a psychoactive effect, just like caffeine giving you energy or making you feel energized is a psychoactive effect. CBD has psychoactive effects, but it's loosely called non-psychoactive because compared to THC, it does not get you high. It does not make you, feel reality, uh, you know, markedly differently, uh, or kind of put you into that euphoric and sometimes catatonic type state. And then the idea that THC is your key to a vault of creativity. Well, it can definitely facilitate creativity, but what it often doesn't facilitate is, an outlet for that creativity. So unless you're intentional about it, but it's too easy sometimes to have a lot of creative thoughts, but then not write them down, not actually start painting, not actually start writing a song or whatever you're trying to be creative with, but to just enjoy the raw creativity in your own mind. Nothing wrong with that, but you know, I guess if you're trying to use it for creative purposes, like just having a plan in place if you're going to actually have an outlet for that creativity. While the intention is to help people get into and enjoy cannabis, it tends to categorize products into boxes that are too neat to contain all the unknowns of cannabis science as it stands today, which is a lot of unknowns. Um, Quite frankly, a lot of unknowns about how cannabis will make you feel or can make you feel. And I mean, that's universal throughout herbal medicine at this point anyway. Uh, Herbal medicine is never studied to the same rigor as a pharmaceutical drug because it's available to all. You can't patent echinacea tea and then make a bunch of money off of that as some kind of drug treating a disease. So they never ever do the research necessary to absolutely prove that echinacea, for example, can do anything. And that's the same thing with cannabis. They don't put money into research that looks into benefits of cannabis as far as the government goes. The government does not. Some private companies try to and do. For example, um, GW Pharmaceuticals out of the UK and their success in getting Epidiolex FDA approved in the United States to treat epilepsy in children. This is a monumental achievement, and it is CBD from a plant extract, and so it is a naturally occurring compound that has been purified and isolated, and then measured and put into a precise dosing tincture in this case, which is an unusual route of administration in the pharmaceutical world, but here it exists through the work of GW Pharma. So that's kind of the exception to the rule. But as far as that only applies then to that exact Epidiolex. So you can't say that, oh, hey, I have CBD from my hemp over here and it cures seizures. You can't advertise that just because GW Pharma has successfully gotten an FDA-approved drug. No, GW Pharma can advertise Epidiolex specifically as having this specific therapeutic effect in this specific population, which still leaves plenty of money to be made for them. So that's good for them. Going on, all discussions of weed and its effects are governed by an oft reported, sometimes unspoken truth. Research hasn't yet caught up to the reality. And it may never really fully, in a way that, you can definitively say, this will have this effect on this person. You can get better and better at guessing, but some level of experimentation is still going to be involved. And again, to compare that to the pharmaceutical world, it's really no different. You go to the doctor, he prescribes a medicine, or she prescribes you a medicine to treat some ailment, some complaint that you have, and you go back and it didn't get better, it didn't work. What do? You go back and they try something different. Maybe it was an antibiotic for an infection and it didn't work. Your infection is still there. So what do? They try another class of antibiotic, something that works differently to try to attack the bacteria in a different manner. Well, it'd be the same thing with cannabis medicine. To some extent, there's going to be a level of experimentation when it comes to treating diseases with cannabis and any herbal medicine and any medicine, including pharmaceuticals. A 2020 science review found that 2/3 of the $1.56 billion devoted to cannabis research in the US, Canada, and the UK was spent on quantifying misuse and negative effects. That leaves research into the benefits and potential other uses for cannabis woefully underfunded and battling with big and often misleading media headlines about the dangers of the drug. Meanwhile, people with legit medical need have few options outside of DIY experimentation, and that's where it is right now. You're going to have to experiment to find what works for you, and it is possible, and you can do it. And once you do, you'll be very happy with yourself, and you'll have something that's effective at treating something that's been bothering you. At the end of this podcast, I'll get into some pointers I have about trying cannabis products if you're interested so if you're interested in trying cannabis products for just even recreational purposes, or maybe you heard it can treat some ailment that you have, I'm going to give some recommendations for how to approach that for new and naive, somebody that's never done it before, users. So, okay. So, and then another point, quantifying misuse and negative effects. Quantifying. What does that mean? Well, that's like all the maybe it's a telephone survey, or maybe it's a survey they give to college students or to high school students that asks, like, have you used marijuana in the past month or in the past year? And how much? And, how big is your joint that you roll? I don't know what they ask, but there's all these things that they ask, all these questions in a survey. And then they do some statistics and write a report and publish that report in a scientific journal. And that's research, even though we're just quantifying the same things over and over and over. We're asking, are kids getting into it? And the answer is no, they're not. But we're going to keep quantifying that. And some of that is necessary, keep track of, trends and, underage use and maybe what people are using it for, things like that. But ultimately, most of these socioeconomic, pharmacoeconomic studies are redundant, and just a waste of money when we could be using that money on things like, quantifying effects of cannabis, both from a medicinal standpoint, also psychoactive effects. We could better understand when somebody's impaired versus not impaired, which could help with driving or even work. How do you manage a cannabis medicine and work depending on your job? The same problems again exist in the pharmaceutical industry with if you get an opioid prescription and having to try to manage your pain with that opioid prescription, with the side effects, with your daily life. So cannabis is just the same as any other pharmaceutical drug in that, or many other pharmaceutical drugs in that realm as well. So I guess a constant theme that I'm kind of harping on today for some reason is that cannabis isn't as different from pharmaceutical drugs as people think it is in terms of how it works medicinally and with side effects and things like that. But it is also different because it is a herbal, either a pure herb, the plant itself, or an extract, or um, some purification of that, but nothing too extreme if you're talking about what's available in recreational and medical markets around the country. So let's see here. And then, yeah, of course, other than just quantifying things for the sake of quantifying them, there's also a lot of research into, does it cause lung cancer, which that's never been shown, but different things like that. They want to ask, does it cause this harm? Does it cause psychosis? Does it cause you know a reduction in IQ? Does it cause all these things? And none of that's been definitively proven one way or another, but you could say the same thing about ibuprofen or aspirin. Like we're learning new stuff about these drugs all the time. Drugs that have been on the market for decades and have been used by hundreds of millions of people, and we're still learning new side effects from them. So it's just an interesting little side there. All right, filling in the gaps. In the absence of science, marketing stepped in to infer that missing piece, and the effects driven product class was born. And you see this, like uplifting or relaxing or, uh, you know, um, creative or I don't know, bubbly. I don't know. You just any kind of mood, you know, marketing. They'll instead of even saying sativa or indica, they'll give a mood. Um, As the weed market has shifted away from the traditional tie-dye aesthetic into the slick, modern designs they now favor, the same principles that influence so many of your non-weed purchases are at work. So I like this point too because well, a couple reasons. Like there is still that level of the tie dye. Depending on a dispensary or brand, they still will adopt these themes. Maybe not for every product, but some products, or maybe they do want that theme because that's the kind of audience they're catering to, or the kind of perception they want to give. But there is a lot of this new slick modern design thing, where the dispensary will be, it'll just feel modern with the sleek counters and lines and um, modern art, and not cartoon drawings of a Scooby Doo or something so much. And then the whole idea that the same principles that influence so many of your non-weed purchases are at work. It's so true. The marketing, traditional marketing and traditional sales has worked its way into the cannabis industry, and those principles, that training is now there, and it works. The reason that they're doing it is because it works with cannabis just like it works with anything else. So moving on into the article further, considering photographer and author Jordana Wright has written an entire book on harnessing the high to make better art. It's no wonder cannabis marketers have attempted to highlight its effects on your activities. Unfortunately, Wright told us via email, quote, cannabis isn't like the typical pharmaceuticals we're used to, where your results are fairly predictable, end quote. Okay, I like this. I agree and disagree. I agree that cannabis isn't super predictable in the effects a given strain or product is going to give to. Sorry, Cannabis is not super predictable in regards to the effect it's going to have on you at a given time, in a given place, in a given condition. It's really hard to predict that right now without just experience. Um, but where I kind of disagree is that I don't think that pharmaceuticals are as predictable as they'd like you to believe all the time. Like I mentioned before, like we're still finding out new side effects for drugs that have been on the market for decades and been given to hundreds of millions of people, um, and potential things that can go wrong and the circumstances in which they can go wrong in different subpopulations that shouldn't be using them. Um, and and even the list of side effects. Say you get a prescription for some medicine from your doctor, and there's a list of side effects on the side of the bottle. May cause dizziness, constipation, may cause drowsiness, whatever. Well, not every person's going to feel every side effects, and some people will feel none of them. And so that's not incredibly predictable. And then whether it actually works for you or not, is also up in the air. Sometimes the medicine might not work, but then your doctor's either going to, just, are you sure it's not working? And maybe you kind of gaslight yourself into thinking it is, or you're afraid to push back that it's not working. Or maybe you do push back. Maybe you do get a new medicine, or, unfortunately, if you're pushing back based on a complaint of a side effect, they'll usually offer a prescription to mask that side effect or treat that side effect, rather than maybe go back to the drawing board and look at a different approach, which strikes me as odd. There's, for any given ailment, there's dozens of different medicines, several different classes, like total chemical backbone structure classes of drugs that can be used. And instead of kind of going back to the beginning and saying, okay, well, can we try a different class that might work with you better? No, they just try to treat the side effect with another drug. And it's just so sketchy to me. Anyway, that doesn't mean weed can't make you feel more creatively energized, but a claim that a particular strain is good for creativity is mostly meaningless, since there is no predicting how a given person will react to it. So true. Ultimately, all cannabis products have value, Wright said, but whether or not the effects described on the package match your body's own response remains to be seen. But if there are cannabinoids in a product, it will have some sort of effect. Very true. So, I mean, if the cannabinoids are in there, it's going to affect you in some way. Even if you don't even have a psychoactive effect, it's still going to affect your body. It can't not. You have cannabinoid receptors that interact with these molecules, and different things happen. So it's going to have an effect. But what exactly is that, you don't know until you try it. You really don't. But sometimes it does match with the packaging, and that's nice when it does. You know, and maybe that's a brand that you stick with and that you like. And that's the whole point. Try different brands and different items until you find something you like, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. Brands approach this type of single focus marketing via a bit of reverse engineering, using stripped down cannabinoid distillates and added terpenes to create a composite concentrate that is then dropped into edibles, capsules, beverages, vape carts, and even rolled into joints. The theory here is that by employing pure isolates in precise amounts, the experience will be the same with each use. Okay. So the idea is good. The idea that, hey, if we take cannabis flowers and, from this particular strain, and we extract it, and we get the cannabinoids really purified. We distill it to where the cannabinoids are now in the 90 plus percent pure cannabinoids, and then we add terpenes in, whether you're adding terpenes back in from the plant, or adding terpenes in from a different commercial source, a different plant. Um, we call them botanical terpenes in the industry, meaning that they're from a plant other than cannabis. So, for example, You can buy limonene, which is what makes citrus smelling and all that. You can buy that extracted from orange peels and use it in cannabis. It's the same molecule, exact same molecule as the limonene found in cannabis, but it just came from oranges. So there's different ways to approach that. Um, so then the idea that this will have, and each of these terpenes, by the way, has been studied individually. You can look on PubMed or just Google, what does limonene do? What does linalool do? What does osmine do? Whatever you want. And there's studies that are like, oh, this has been seen to have antibacterial effects. This has been shown to have calming effects. This has been shown to have energizing effects, whatever it is. There's each terpene in itself has its own research. And so you can get an idea if you're adding limonene to a product, it might make somebody feel more energetic. If you're adding linalool to a product, it might make somebody feel more relaxed and ready for bed. So if that was the only thing you're adding, it would probably be pretty accurate, or could be quite accurate for how somebody would feel. But another problem here is the whole entourage effect. That is a hypothesis that it's not just a given cannabinoid or cannabinoids. It's not just terpenes or a given terpene that have an effect when you're consuming cannabis. It is all of the terpenes and all of the cannabinoids interacting in a very complex manner in your body to produce the ultimate effect. And so, which I think is absolutely accurate. And so if that's the case, then that means that if you add limonene and linalool and THC, that doesn't mean you're going to get energized, relaxed, and high. What does it mean? I don't know. And so the more complicated these mixtures get, which any given strain of cannabis is going to be expressing at least about a dozen terpenes in a decent measurable level, sometimes more, up to hundreds, or up to maybe 100 in a single plant that are measurable, not necessarily in an appreciable amount, but measurable. And then any given plant can have anywhere from a handful of cannabinoids present to a dozen or dozens of cannabinoids present. So once you have all that thrown in a mix, how do you know what's doing what and how it's having an effect on the entourage effect? Say you have something that's a mixture that makes you feel relaxed, and you add limonene to try to make it not feel so relaxing. And then it makes you feel more relaxed. That's a total possibility with the way this works. So all of that said, on top of the fact that, the idea that these companies can do this absolutely consistently from batch to batch over time, it just doesn't work, because even the strain itself, when it's grown, different things happen when it's grown, and it's not the same exact um, uh, cannabinoid and terpene profile every time they harvest, even though they clone it, even though they try their best to treat it the same every time. It's not perfect. Environmental conditions aren't perfect, and these are biological organisms. There's biological variability. You might give them the exact same conditions, but for some reason the plant just does something different, because that's what it does. Entirely possible. So once you then take this new mixture from the same strain, but a different harvest, now there's a new mixture of cannabinoids and terpenes. Now you purify them so it's slightly different, put it back together. Well, it might or might not have the same effect on you. So the more consistent a company can be, the more likely it is that you'll have the same effect time after time, and that's what you'll want to stick with. So that would be an indicator of a good company. And then, so then on top of all that, I also take issue with the edibles, sativa, indica, whatever in the edibles, because inhaling versus eating is totally different. So, I mean, you inhale THC, you feel one kind of high, and you feel it pretty much instantly as you inhale. or very rapidly. If you eat it, it can be very delayed in its effect, and it feels different. It is a different high. Same with terpenes; they're going to be metabolized differently whether you inhale them or eat them. And so if I have the same, say I take this concentrate here and I take a dab of it and I have this effect, and then so I'm going to put it into brownies and think it's going to make me feel the same way when it's in the brownies. Well, it's not. So um, that one's also tricky too. And I think people put a lot of stock into what terpenes do orally versus inhaled, um, and without really understanding how those are different and how those can be very different in how they feel. So, going on, true, you might notice similarities with each use of an engineered product, but your body will still act differently based on other factors like your body weight, food intake that day, and other medications you're taking. It's hardly a guarantee you'll have the same experience twice in a row, let alone that an effect can be universalized across all users. And that's so true. I mean, if you eat a big meal and then take your edible one day, and normally you take it before you eat, you're going to feel very different. It's going to have a very different effect on you. What you eat, maybe you normally eat, a lot of high fat foods, and then one day you eat a lot of leafy greens and fruits, and it might you might have a different effect, or you eat a different food that you don't normally eat, and it might have an effect on you. You really don't know. Particularly since we're talking about like terpenes here, and terpenes are in virtually every flowering plant and fruit on the planet. And so if terpenes are having an effect on you from the cannabis, they can have an effect on you from any other plant. And a classic one to talk about is myrcene, which is found in high concentrations in uh, mango. And so the idea being that if you smoke a joint and eat a mango, you're going to have a more pronounced high or pronounced effect, because the myrcene in the mango is a very relaxing and mellowing terpene. And in that case, also there's a lot more in the skin than there is in the actual flesh of the fruit. So even though it's kind of strong tasting, I don't know. Actually, don't take my advice there. I haven't looked up if that's poisonous or not. But I've eaten the skin of a mango and I didn't die. So it's just not the most pleasing taste, but it's clearly where a lot of the terpenes are contained. All right, where was I? So, moving on in the article, during the research phase of writing Cannabis for Creatives, I spoke to experts in the fields of neuroscience and cannabis genetics, and they all agreed that while pot does make us feel certain effects, those effects vary too much based on other factors like body chemistry, dosage, and method of use to have a predictable and quantifiable result, Wright noted. It all really depends what you're looking for from the experience and how specific the purported effects are, whether single strain or composite. Um, yeah, so I would agree with that. That it is very difficult to have a consistent and predictable and reliable effect, but you can get that. The only real ultimate issue is that at some point that product might not work the same for you, and you'll have to kind of start again trying to find something that works. That's a little bit of a frustration with cannabis medicine and herbal medicine, but overall it's worth it if you're staying off of pharmaceutical drugs and managing your health with nutrition, essentially. um, So, yeah, as far as what you're looking for from the experience, I'll get to that later as well. We can convince ourselves that the marketing on the package will apply to us and create that sensation. But in that case, you're looking at more of a placebo effect. And that could be, you could just, I'm going to be uplifted. So then you go out and have fun with your friends. And yeah, it totally uplifted me. And it really didn't do anything. But because your mind convinced you it did, you think it did. And there's nothing wrong with the placebo effect. I'm actually a huge fan of the placebo effect. Like, if you can just tell me that this is going to do something for me and it's really just sugar and then I feel better, like, that's fantastic. I love it. Um, I might always feel energized if smoking Blue Dream, but that same strain might make another person feel subdued. It's as much about our bodies as the strains themselves. Yep, that's true. So, I mean, um, I might be smoking something that always makes me feel ready to go out, and you're like, okay, cool, I'll try that before we go out to the bar, and then you take a couple puffs, and suddenly you don't want to move. You're done. You're just like turning on the TV, and you don't want to go anymore. Meanwhile, I'm raring and ready to go. So that can definitely happen. Suggesting effects is the middle ground. Well, this I half agree with, but we'll get into that. So, not all cultivators go all in on Sarah. This is a little bit funky worded sentence. I'm just going to read it as is. I apologize. Hopefully, it makes sense by the time I'm done reading it. Not all cultivators go all in on Sarah Aziz, the founder of Sundazed, a California cannabis operator, makes gorgeously packaged and highly flavorful goodies that don't tell you how to feel but suggest how you might. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of just a hedge. When you're it's a little bit gimmicky because when you give a mood like, say, energized or uplifted or mellowed, um, you know, versus you might feel mellow. I mean, what's the real difference? But I get it. Not every consumer gets excited about terpenes. True. Or knows why they should. So, using these flavorful and experience influencing chemicals to map out what a consumer could experience is more helpful than taking a firm stance and picking one single word as the definitive effect. Yeah, I would agree with that. So, I mean, if you focus group your product and you get different feedback, um, and then you kind of reflect the range of experiences people had as what could happen to you, that would be a good way of doing it. THC affects the brain's areas that influence pleasure, thinking, movement, sensory time perception, amongst other things, Aziz told Lifehacker. The reason we use the term effects is to communicate as clearly as possible to the consumer and help them align with the experience they're about to enjoy. And yeah, there is something to be said about kind of like getting yourself ready to experience something different and just being aligned with what that might be. So, it's kind of like watching the trailer of a movie and kind of knowing where the movie is going to relatively go before you watch it. I sometimes skip watching the trailer, and sometimes I have no idea where the movie is going at all. And it can be interesting in its own way, but it can also be like a little bit hard to deal with because it's like, what am I trying to pay attention to? What is important about this scene right now? Because I don't know if this is a horror movie or a love movie or what. Um, but anyway, for Sundazed, this means labeling a sativa-leaning strain with citrine terps glow up and letting smokers know that the effects are suggested, saying you might feel motivated, uplifted, or energized, as people often report being up from cultivars with citrus notes. And that's true. I mean, citrusy is usually associated with, energy and up. You can see it in bar soap and hand soap and stuff too. Citrus scents are often associated with energy. Our listed effects are terpene based, so it is based in science, but it is also a way to market the anticipated reaction to the product because a lot of consumers don't want to get into the nitty gritty of terpenes, Aziz said. And that's fair. It can be confusing, and especially since nobody really knows all that much about it, and it hasn't been, studied to the point that I would say that, oh yeah, hey, we've got some really good ideas of how things will affect different people at different times. We don't. So I can see, and then and it is complicated. It's probably actually more complicated than a lot of terpene enthusiasts realize. So if say you have a concentrate that's 1% limonene and 1% linalool, well, at what point, just because they're present at the same level doesn't mean that they're going to have the same level of effect. So like given a dose of limonene might be a tenth of a dose of linalool. So that's a whole nother layer. So just because it has 1% linalool doesn't mean it will do anything. Maybe that's not enough linalool, whereas 1% limonene is way more than enough. It could be, or it, could be the other way around. I'm just speaking off the cuff for examples right now. So moving on. If you don't know what you're doing, you can use these suggestions to find the cultivars that will give you what you want. And there's nothing wrong with preferring distillate-based cannabis products, provided you are always having a good time. So this is an interesting sentence I kind of want to unpack. So yeah, I agree with that. If you don't know what you're doing, you can definitely use the marketing to help guide you. I'd also encourage an honest conversation with the bud tender, the person that's helping you pick it out, because they can have direct experience with with the different strains, and they might have some further information that could be helpful to you. And then I don't know why suddenly there's this little quote about, and there's nothing wrong with preferring distillate-based cannabis products, provided you are always having a good time. I guess if I were to read between the lines a little bit, I think they're probably talking about dabbing, and it is easy to overdo it with dabbing. So if you get too much, you won't necessarily be having a good time. And I've seen people that took too big of a dab when they're inexperienced, and they become dizzy, nauseous, lethargic. They don't want to move, do anything for quite some time. So, I guess that would be not having a good time. So, yeah, provided you're not overdoing it, I guess. Okay. But to find the strains or designer effects based products that work for you, you have to actually try them. Some people find themselves generally amenable to the majority of strains, while those who are more sensitive will have to be pickier about what they procure. Okay, so this is another interesting topic about just kind of how different people are. Like, some people really get into the sativa and indica classification, and like, yeah, sativa makes me ready to go work out, go to the concert, go talk to people at the bar. I don't know. And then, but when I, smoke an indica, then I just want to play video games or sleep and just like lay on the couch all day and, whatever. A lot of people report that sensitivity. And then others kind of report less variation in their experiences from strain to strain. Like, feeling high feels high, whether they have sativa, indica, this strain, that strain. Feeling high is just feels high, and that's it to them, and everything in between. So, and then other sensitivities could exist. You could have sensitivities to terpenes you're not aware of, or to allergens within the cannabis, whether it's cannabis itself or something else that's on it, a pesticide, or some other impurity, or maybe mold or something like that if it's not properly handled. So those can also cause sensitivities. And some people may not notice. Some people could smoke probably moldy weed and be just fine. And other people might either have an allergic reaction or end up in the hospital, depending on the severity. For example, immunocompromised cancer patients who are on chemotherapy might not have much of an immune system. And so if they smoke cannabis, raw cannabis flower that has aspergillus fungus growing on it, it can actually take hold in their lungs and result in huge problems. Even unfortunately, it can result in death ultimately, that kind of infection. And that's not the only way to get that kind of infection, that kind of fungal infection, but it has been associated before. And so that's why I recommend anybody that's taking cannabis for medicinal purposes, particularly if you are lacking an immune system in any way, whether you're an AIDS patient, cancer patient, or other immunocompromised, you're on some other immunosuppressant drug, maybe a arthritis drug. I would recommend not consuming raw cannabis flower or smoking raw cannabis flower. I would recommend concentrates, edibles, um, and things that are, an edible is going to go through your whole digestive tract. It's not going to get a direct access to such a sensitive area as your lungs, and concentrates kill generally have several kill steps built into their processing pathways, and so they're quite clean and sterile compared to raw cannabis flowers. So those are also good options. But anyway, again, I would not recommend immunocompromised people to inhale or smoke cannabis flower directly. And finally, looks like the final paragraph for this article here. Eventually, scientific research will find out more about what makes weed tick. It's not unreasonable to think that this information will someday be available in the form of a test or profile that can help you find the bespoke weed experience you're seeking. But for now, and you can thank the stigma of prohibition and the lack of enthusiasm for positive weed studies for this, trial and error is the industry standard. Okay, yes, so there's quite a bit to unpack in this closing paragraph. So, eventually, yes, assuming that the stigma continues to drop, that people do begin to care more about funding and researching the potential benefits of cannabis. Assuming that happens, eventually, yeah, the research will catch up to be able to provide some very, very good guidelines and very good treatment tracks to get people going in the right direction and make quick adjustments and get people the appropriate medication, treatment, cannabis-based treatment that they need. The idea, it's not unreasonable to think that this information will someday be available in the form of a test or profile that can help you find the bespoke weed experience you're seeking. So a couple things about this. That is possible, but I guess got to be so far away. I mean, we're still not even doing like basic routine drug metabolism screening for any drugs, for almost any pharmaceutical drug that's prescribed. In very few cases are metabolic or other tests or screening done to make sure that the drug is compatible with you or to optimize the dose that's given to you. It doesn't even happen with big money pharmaceuticals right now. So this is a long ways off before it gets to cannabis. So I would definitely not wait around for this. If you think that you're going to wait 5-10 years for this to sort itself out, you will not get relief from cannabis for that time. I would recommend to jump into the trial and error approach, as which is the industry standard, as mentioned in that last sentence, because right now that's what it requires, is just you to go and try different things yourself. And so that's what I'm going to get into right now, is just I'm going to close out this podcast and this with some just closing words about how to approach cannabis. If you're curious, if you're new, if you've tried it once and you didn't like your experience, if you haven't tried it and you just don't know what to expect, well, we're going to go over that right now. So a couple things. There's going to be a general breakdown of actually probably the most important question is, what are you expecting to experience? Okay, so are you approaching this like, I heard it's fun, I want to have fun. I heard it can make you creative, I want to try it and paint. I heard it can treat this ailment that I have and make this feel better. I want to try it for that. Have that very well defined. Absolutely. Maybe even write it down. But then when it comes to you picking an individual product or trying cannabis, put that out the window. That's what you need to know that for after the experience is over. But during the experience, have no expectations. Just experience what happens and maybe write notes about what that is. Like, oh, I was taking this because I wasn't sleeping well and I was hoping it would help me sleep, but I noticed that my back hurt less when I took it. Um, or maybe you were trying to take it to be creative and it made you sleep too sleepy to be creative. So write that down. But don't have any expectations about what this particular product is going to do. Just experience it and take notes. And then when that's over, compare it back to what you were hoping to experience. And if it matches, you might have a product that you can go with. So buy it again and see if it keeps working. If it does, great. Um, Keep going with it as long as it works. If it doesn't work again, it was an inconsistent product or something else happened, just move on. And if it doesn't match with your experience, move on, try another product. So there's going to be so beyond that, the next big question you need to really answer is, how are you willing to consume cannabis? Are you interested in smoking? Are you interested in inhaling concentrates? Are those too scary, or you're worried about them, or it just doesn't seem like your thing? So you're more interested in edibles, or another, or maybe you just want a topical. Maybe you just have a skin or pain ailment, and you want to just see if cream or topical will help. So that's the next thing you need to know, is how you want to approach it. So um, you know, ultimately, what this is all going to come down to is brand and strain or product. Try different brands, try different strains and products, find what works for you, and then stick with that brand, stick with that strain. Um, and when it comes to approaching it for the first time, or for a fairly new person, just go slow and easy. You don't have to smoke a whole joint. You don't have to eat a whole 100 milligram chocolate bar. In fact, do not do those things. Take a couple puffs on the joint, set it down, wait. In the case of inhaling, you should feel effects pretty quickly within a couple minutes. And so wait at least 10 minutes and evaluate how you feel. Maybe even wait 30 minutes and see if you start feeling like you're coming back down, or where you're going with it, before you take another puff or two. And then you can build up from there as you gain more experience. And then you're less likely to find yourself in a situation where, you're maybe at a party and then you smoke too much, and then you can't be social like you intended to. And it was supposed to calm your social anxiety in your mind, and that's what you wanted, but you took too much. Well, you'll avoid that by not taking too much. And with the case of edibles, you're going to want to try something. I wouldn't recommend like hard candies, for example, to start with, because a hard candy is really difficult to break into smaller pieces. And so, say you get a 10 milligram hard candy, and it's kind of, maybe you can just try to suck on it for 10 minutes, and that's hard to reproduce, right? So I would recommend getting something like a chocolate, or another kind of edible that you can break into smaller pieces more easily. That's easier to say, like, okay, this is a 10 milligram chocolate. I break it in half. I take one half. I break it in half again. This is going to be roughly 2.5 milligrams in a piece. Great place to start. And then wait at least 30 to 60 minutes, and for beginners, 60 to 90 minutes after you take that first little chunk, and see how you feel. You might not feel anything, but you might feel high or some other effects, and just monitor that. And if you feel like you took too much, it's okay. Just sleep it off. When it comes to cannabis, if you ever take too much, all you have to do is go to bed and keep yourself calm. Nothing bad will happen. You can't die. You can't, really get hurt from it. You can feel like you're dying. You can feel like something bad's happening. And that's really the worst part of it, is just that feeling of having consumed too much and dread of, what could happen. Well, the answer is nothing. All that's going to happen is you're going to have to sleep it off. Until you go to sleep for a full night, it's not going to fully wear off. And so if you do find yourself in a situation where you've consumed too much, just, um, carefully get yourself to bed, drink a glass of water, and relax, and just enjoy the experience as much as you can. And don't do so much the next time. So those are some just general pointers I'd have if you're interested in approaching cannabis for recreational or medical purposes. And with that, I will wrap up this episode. Thank you for listening, and I will see everybody again later.